Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. You sent over some sources for us to explore.
That's right. The main one seems to be this PDF, Hiu hat vitam lihunk, and the goal, as always, is to really get the core ideas, make it clear without getting bogged down.
Exactly. And you also shared an infographic which kind of sets the scene, I suppose. Gives a broader psychological context.
Yeah, it throws out a few interesting stats, things like over 400 types of mental illnesses identified globally. It gives you a sense of the scale we're dealing with in psychology.
It really does. And some specific stats on that image caught my eye, too. It mentioned something about 60% of people having psychological issues linked to vision. That sounds quite high. Maybe something to look into another time.
Hmm. Yeah, that one seems a bit unusual, maybe a translation thing or specific context needed, but interesting nonetheless. It also mentioned that around 20% of CEOs might be psychopaths.
Right. And things like internet addiction,
Huh.
affecting 420 million people, or the high percentage of mothers experiencing baby blues, even the general depression statistic, about 12% of the population.
So it paints a picture of, well, a lot going on psychologically for many people. ASD is just one piece of that much larger puzzle.
Precisely. It helps frame our focus. So let's dive into that main PDF source now, the Iu Heid V Tom Lai Hong Kwan. You pointed us to pages 66 and 67, specifically for ASD.
Yep, that's where the core information on ASD seems to be located in this particular document.
Okay, so how does this source define ASD? What's the fundamental idea?
Well, fundamentally, it describes ASD as a disorder that impacts how someone socializes, how they communicate, and their behavior patterns.
And it really stresses the spectrum part, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's maybe the most crucial takeaway. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. It manifests very differently, different intensities, different challenges, different strengths.
Right. So two people with ASD could present very, very differently.
Exactly. The source on page 67 then kind of breaks it down into core areas that are often affected. First up is communication.
Okay, communication. What kind of differences does it mention?
It talks about potential challenges with both verbal and nonverbal communication. So it might not just be about like the words themselves, but understanding tone or sarcasm or body language, maybe.
That implied layer of meaning, the
Yep,
stuff that's not explicitly said.
precisely. That can sometimes be harder to pick up on intuitively for some individuals with ASD.
Okay. And the next area mentioned is social interaction. How does ASD affect that, according to the source?
Well, it suggests difficulties in sort of reading social cues, like facial expressions or maybe understanding unwritten social rules. This can make navigating social situations or forming relationships potentially more challenging.
It's not necessarily about not wanting connection, but maybe about processing the social information differently.
That seems to be the implication, yes. A different way of understanding and engaging in those social exchanges.
Makes sense. Then the third area is repetitive behaviors or restricted interests. What does the source say there?
It points to this as a common characteristic. So that could mean things like repetitive movements, perhaps a very strong need for routine and predictability, or having really intense, deep interests in specific topics.
Like becoming a real expert on something very specific.
Potentially, yeah. The source doesn't list examples, but those are the kinds of things often associated with this aspect. It can be a way of finding comfort or focus.
So communication, social interaction, and these repetitive patterns or focused interests, those are the core areas identified.
That's what this source lays out. And then importantly, it adds some context, some key considerations about ASD on page 67 as well.
Right. What are those?
Well, first, it emphasizes that ASD is considered a lifelong condition. It's not something people typically, grow out of.
Okay, that's fundamental.
Yeah.
And it usually becomes apparent in childhood.
Yes, typically diagnosed in early childhood when developmental differences might become more noticeable.
And what about the cause? Does the source offer any definitive answers there?
Not definitive, no. It says there isn't a single known cause. Instead, current understanding, as reflected in the source, points towards a combination of genetic factors and possibly environmental influences playing a role.
So it's complex, likely not just one thing.
Very likely. And crucially, the source directly addresses some common myths.
Ah, yes, this is so important. What does it say?
It explicitly states that ASD is not caused by bad parenting
Good. Needs saying.
and also not caused by vaccines. It tackles that one head on, too.
Which is vital, given how persistent that misinformation has been. Debunking those myths is key.
Absolutely essential for creating understanding, not blame. The source also talks about early diagnosis and intervention.
Why is that highlighted as important?
Because getting support early on, tailored interventions, can really help individuals with ASD. It helps them develop skills, find strategies, and ultimately reach their full potential.
So early support can make a real difference to outcomes.
That's the strong suggestion, yes. It can significantly impact development and quality of life. And another point the source makes
Go on.
is that individuals with ASD have a really wide range of abilities and strengths. It's not just about challenges.
Right. It's crucial not to just focus on deficits. People with ASD, like any group, are diverse, with unique talents and perspectives.
Exactly. Recognizing those strengths is just as important as understanding the challenges.
So, pulling this together,
Yeah.
what are the big takeaways from this source material on ASD?
Well, I'd say the spectrum nature is key, the sheer diversity of it, that it's lifelong, typically diagnosed early.
And definitely not caused by parenting or vaccines, but likely a complex mix of genetics and environment.
Right. And the real value placed on early intervention, and importantly, recognizing the strengths and abilities individuals possess.
Okay. And connecting this back to our listeners, why is understanding this important for everyone?
Because, fundamentally, understanding leads to more acceptance and better support. It helps us build communities that are truly inclusive, where people with ASD and their families feel seen and valued for who they are.
Creating environments where neurodiversity isn't just tolerated, but actually welcomed and understood.
Precisely. It benefits everyone when we foster that kind of inclusion.
So just to quickly recap the main points from our source, ASD is that spectrum disorder affecting social communication and behavior patterns. It's lifelong, usually spotted early, no single cause, but likely genetics, environmental factors, not parenting or vaccines. And early support is really beneficial.
A good summary. And maybe a final thought to leave listeners with. How might we all contribute to that greater societal understanding? Thinking about neurodiversity, including ASD. What small shifts in our own attitudes or actions could make environments more supportive, more enriching for absolutely everyone?
Something to definitely reflect on. How can we be more patient, more inclusive in our daily interactions? A valuable question. Thanks for digging into this with us today.
My pleasure. Until next time.